reading on what was going on, what do you realize? Is there anything that you recognize was going on while that reading was going on? In terms of the characters, the narrator, and the angel, and Joseph? What do you realize? Feel free to shout out loud. Jesus was a refugee. Okay, so he was taken to Egypt for a little bit. And eventually they went back to Israel. But what do you realize about people out at the front and the reading on what was going on? Joseph never said anything. Now that is interesting, don't you think? That Joseph did not say anything, but all that Joseph did was everything he was told to do. And I think when it comes to the whole thing about the incarnation concerning the Christmas story, incarnation simply means that God comes and takes on human flesh to live in our state and to be a human, to die for us, to live, to come back to life so that we can have a relationship with God. So God takes on human flesh. Jesus comes, he takes on human flesh. And in this story, Joseph is somebody who is like a minor character. You know what minor character is? This is what minor character is. When you're watching your films or you're reading your books or you're at the theater, the minor character is that character whereby they're just kind of there. They're not meant to take away from the main character, they're just mainly supporting the main character. So Joseph is the minor character, he's mainly supporting the main character. Another thing is that the minor character only comes in particular scenes in the actual play or film that you're watching or whatever theatre production that you're looking at. The minor character is someone who just plays their parts, but they don't take away from the main character. And Joseph is someone who we consider to be a minor character. He may not say it, but if you think about it, Joseph is considered to be a minor character. And I'll give you an example. When we were in our deacons meeting, I was asked concerning what should the theme be for Christmas? And I said, characters of Christmas. So I was asked, okay, listen. So I was listening. I said, Herod. Okay. Zechariah. Oh yeah, Zechariah. Mary. So one of the deacons said, I'm not going to say the name. So I put up for Mary. Like, Mary. And I said, yeah, Joseph. And they said, Joseph? He doesn't know, no one cares about him. But that's the idea, isn't it? Because how many of you thought about Joseph from January until December? How many of you thought within the period of January until this time of December, before this day, how many of you thought about Joseph? Yeah, really, because Joseph is one of those characters. He's not saying anything, but there's something you must notice about Joseph and his lifestyle. And I am here today to make a campaign for Joseph. I'm here to make a campaign for Joseph, who I'm going to call Average Joe. So Average Joe here is someone, when you read the Bible, he doesn't really seem to be special. I mean, he's a carpenter. Okay, that's your average Joe, 9 to 5 job. He is not really a carpenter, but if there's anything you can say about him, which is kind of, in one sense, like an ooh, is that he's from the family line of King David, so he's of the royal family. If there's another ooh, it's the fact that he is marrying Mary, who is the earthly mother of Jesus. And so as a result, he's the adopted father of Jesus. So you have two clues to Average Joe here. And then one thing I find quite interesting about Average Joe is the fact that in all the things that are going on, you notice that he has not said anything. And I think this is quite interesting. Out of the 3 people who got a visitation from an angel telling them they're going to have a child, here's my campaign now for Average Joe. Zechariah gets told you're going to have a child, and he says, how can it be? I'm too old, and my wife is trying to have children. Mary gets told you're going to have a child, and Mary says, how can it be? I'm still a virgin. Joseph gets told, marry Mary. You know what Joseph does? He's quiet. And he goes and does that. It says, when you read it, it actually says he got up and took Mary to be his wife. Average Joe is not just Average Joe. He is indeed an action man. Next slide, please. He's an action man. He is the person whom he doesn't say much. You don't have his words recorded, but he does a lot of stuff. I'm campaigning for Joe because Joe is somebody who he hears what he's told and he doesn't say anything, but he just does what he's told. I'll give you an example. Mary has her words recorded. You can tell Mary's words that recorded. Mary will say, I haven't known a man. Mary will say, I'm the Lord's servant. Mary even has her best track, her best song on Spotify recorded in the Bible. You know that song? The song is called the Magnificat. It's where she's praising God because of what God has done. She has that song recorded, and you know that song to this day. When it comes to things about parenting, about worrying about your children, Mary's words are recorded when they go to find Jesus after Jesus been missing for a few days, and she says to Jesus, "You made me and your father worry about us. Worry about you." Mary's words are recorded. Her words are recorded when it comes to supporting your child in their ministry or in their business, because when Jesus is starting at the beginning of the ministry, before it starts, Mary says to Jesus, "There's a problem," and then she says to the servant, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Her words are recorded. But do you know whose words are not recorded? Joseph. His words are not recorded. But what we do know that's recorded concerning Joseph is always the fact that he takes action. So I would like to propose to you today that Joseph is an action man. And simply, I'm going to finish very soon. There are two things that we can learn from Joseph. First thing is this: we should not be quick to judge people. And I find it interesting that within the story of Jesus coming, there is this whole sense of Joseph is someone who is going to marry this lady, and this lady all of a sudden just comes up with this big anomaly. She's pregnant out of nowhere. Now, in that culture, compared to this culture, know for sure that if people see that, there's questions. And in that culture, what would happen, and potentially, because Joseph is the one who's the husband, so he can take her to the priest and say that there's something actually wrong here, because I've not touched this lady and she's got baby. Or he could just take her out and say, "This lady's got baby, I've not touched her," and then people can take her and stone her. But you know what Joseph does? He doesn't say anything. He thinks and he reflects. How am I going to protect her? How am I going to guard her honor? And that's what he's doing. He's thinking to himself, what's the most peaceful way and the best way to handle this? So instead of judging her straight away, he thinks about the best way to make peace, because he is a person who is kind and gentle and caring. And because of that, you see that it works out that he's patient in his waiting, and God intervenes and tells him, "Joseph, no, you've got it wrong. Don't misunderstand. The baby that Mary has is of the Holy Spirit." So Joseph shows us that we should not be quick to judge people. And there's no one who's ever perfect. And so if we are quick in a split second to point fingers at people to judge them, then we're misunderstanding and we're forgetting where we have come from and what God has done in our lives. And so this Christmas, I think one of the things that we should take on board is this: be a person who instead of pointing at people in judgment, be a person who goes out to establish peace. Be a person who goes out to establish good relationships with people. Be a person who goes out to establish a good ground of relationship with people. Even if you've been offended, find a way of peace if you can. Second thing is this that Average Joe teaches us. I'm going to call him Action Joe for this part. Action Joe teaches us that obedience is a way of life. That's what his life teaches us. Obedience is a way of life. First thing he shows us is this: you must be willing to taint your reputation and your name to obey God. Why do I say this? Because he has about 4 different tensions to his situation. First of all, the lady who he's going to marry is pregnant. That sets up the whole chain reaction. Because the community and the society's voice says this: stone her. Because that's what the law also says. That's the second voice. The second voice is the voice of the law. The law says this: ideally, you should actually check the matter to find out if it's true. But if they act on instinct and just do this part of the law, then they would actually push the stone her as well. Third tension is this: it is hard because he loves her, and so one of the things is that him being a kind man, he doesn't want her to be subjected to disgrace in public. So he wants there to be peace. He wants to save her. And the fourth tension is this: is when God comes in and God says to him, "Joseph, do not worry. take her to be your wife. The child that she's going to have is of the Holy Spirit. And what does action Joe do? He takes action as any good person should who obeys God. He does exactly what the angel says. His life shows us obedience is a way of life. In fact, if you look at the story, each time he gets a visit from an angel, he doesn't wait to obey. He obeys straight away. When he has a dream, he wakes up and he does it. When he hears something he's been told, he just goes and he does it. So his life also shows us that obedience is something that we should aim to do straight away. We should aim to obey God quickly and straight away. Obedience is a way of life. And that's how we should live our lives as well. He's a man of action. He's a man who follows God. And as a result of his obedience to God, if you check it carefully, he ends up taking a part in fulfilling the prophecies that God speaks concerning the Messiah. Because remember, Herod, because of his wickedness, ended up fulfilling a prophecy that God speaks concerning the trouble and evil that will come on Israel because of what he'd done. Joseph, because of his obedience to God, plays a part in a prophecy which speaks about the blessing of God and the joy and hope that God will bring through his son, Jesus Christ. So because of his obedience, he does something else as well. He plays a crucial part in keeping Jesus safe. Now think about it. The creator of heaven and earth humbles himself and becomes a little baby and becomes vulnerable. But when he becomes vulnerable, he commits himself and he entrusts himself to his creation to look after him. And now all of the human beings that lived in the world at that time chose Joseph. God knew whom he was picking to look after him. And we see that Joseph, because of his obedience to God, played a part in Jesus being saved. Because Jesus is vulnerable at that point. You have to understand that. He puts himself into human conditions. So he is vulnerable at that point. Second final thing is this. Action Joe shows us this. Obedience will sometimes put us into dangerous situations. Because of his obedience to God, Herod is now the person that's looking out for him to try to finish him and Jesus and Mary. And so he lives a life on the run because of his obedience to God. And obedience will do that sometimes. When you listen to God, it will get you in trouble. I say this on purpose. I don't want to put any nice thing on it. I want to tell you the truth. If you listen to God, sometimes you will get in trouble. But the peace you have in that trouble is the fact that you listen to God. It's an interesting dynamic. So just bear that in mind. And final thing he teaches us about obedience being a way of life is this. We must always make sure that the visitations that God gives us and the encounters that we have with God, we treat them as special. Because whenever he heard from God or had an encounter, he made sure that he obeyed. So we don't take the messages of God for granted. And I just want to say, do not take this message that you are hearing today for granted. So the question is this. Following on in Action Joe's steps, what action will you take this Christmas? What action will you take which will speak louder than words? Because his actions are what is recorded, and those are things that speak louder than words. What action will you take? Will it be an action whereby you finally start that? I'm not knocking anyone here when I say this. You finally start that diet that you're meant to start. I'll be honest, we need to do it. Or is it that you begin to do the exercises that you're meant to be doing? Will it be that you finally take the steps for reconciliation with somebody? But I want to add one more, which I think is important for everyone here if you haven't taken the step, is do what Action Joe did. When he listened to God, he obeyed God. And he made sure that Jesus was kept safe through his obedience to God. My point is this. How long will you wrestle with God as God wrestles with your conscience? Here is an action you can take. Finally get it. Finally give up. And see what God will do in your life, in you, with you, and through you. Receive Jesus, and you will see the adventure that God takes you on. So we're going to let's continue in this mode. We're going to continue now singing unto God. Let's just sing to God the song.